Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Social Work Bubble podcast. I'm your host, Laura. I'm a licensed master social worker here in New York, and today we are joined by a wonderful guest, Julie McGue, an adoptee here in the United States, and she's here to share her experience processing her adoption, finding relatives, struggles that she's had, how social workers have come into the mix. So there's a lot that we're going to be covering I'm really excited about. Thank you so much, Julie, for coming on today.
Oh, my pleasure. I love talking about this topic, and social workers were so influential in how I reached the finish line. So it's a great tie-in.
Exciting. Now, as we get started, do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit to those listening?
Sure. So I'm also a twin, which adds a different wrinkle to the adoptee equation.
Yes.
My twin sister and I were adopted together. Interesting. We were adopted during the closed adoption era, which means no information was passed on to my adoptive parents through the adoption agency or from my birth parents. So everybody was under the understanding that privacy was going to trump any right to know, which has become a big issue in adoption rights in this part of adoption history. So my story is that I was raised in a big Irish Catholic family, and the oldest three of us are adoptees. And then the younger three were my parents' biological kids. They were infertile, and then all of a sudden they weren't.
Wow.
The twist was really fun. I think my parents did a great job of managing it seamlessly. We all got the same allowance and the same set of punishments if we didn't do our chores.
Wow.
So that being the case, I was a very happy kid and had my twin sister who looked exactly like me. So one of the things adoptees think about is who do I look like? And I was afforded the luxury of knowing exactly who I looked like, but we didn't know if we took after our birth parents or not. So I waited until I was almost 50 years old and had a health issue before looking for my birth parents and adoption history.
Wow. Now, growing up, had you always known that you were adopted? Was that a conversation in your family, or you didn't find out until later?
No, we always did know that we were adopted. I don't remember when they told us, but they had a pretty good, track record in the sense that every once in a while around our birthdays, we'd have this little adoption chat in the living room, and they'd say, how much they wanted us and how much they cared for us and loved us. And it was always a very uncomfortable conversation because my mom would usually end up the conversations and say, I hope you girls are happy. And we'd say, yeah, we are. Where is this going? And then they'd say, if you ever want to look into your adoption story, we'll help you.
Wow.
Which turns out to be not the case when I actually started doing it. In my 50s, which is the subject of my first book, Twice a Daughter. So,
wow. I feel like, stuff like that, like talking about being adopted, so it's never a surprise, and then like parents having that openness for a child to explore like their birth family and everything can be so important in minimizing any trauma. Would you agree with that, or do you have a different perspective?
Adoption is a traumatic thing, whether it's open adoption or closed adoption. There's this innate vulnerability about feeling unwanted. No matter what my parents said, there was still this question in my mind, well, why didn't our biological parents keep us? And I think because we couldn't know that, it created maybe a bigger balloon than it needed to be. The current day, which started in the 1980s, open adoption, kids really do get a lot more information about their family background, and they have an idea why their adoption was the plan made for them. I don't know that necessarily eases the angst about not feeling wanted. I don't think
Right.
that is an issue that ever goes away. And that is what's really called the primal wound of adoption, is that primary rejection of not being raised in the family that you're biologically related to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Were you often talking to your siblings growing up about like your adoption experience or not so much?
No, we were just kids being kids, getting
Yeah.
into trouble and having fun, because I have a brother 2 years younger that was also adopted, not a
Hmm.
biological relative. We were a little pack, the three of us. We, how when you meet somebody that has a common experience as you don't even really have to talk about it. You
Hmm.
just know that they know, and so then
Right.
you don't have to go there.
Hmm.
But we were a little packed. We had each other's back. He was so much different than my sister and I. So we had light brown hair and hazel eyes. He had blonde curly hair with blue eyes. And then the three biological kids, they looked a whole bunch different. I mean, we really were kind of a crazy mix of kids. Somehow we all looked alike, I suppose.
Hmm. Oh, wow. That's so lovely though, that like, I mean, as kids, you kind of just come together, without having to talk about those
Yeah,
things.
yeah. My parents were really wonderful parents.
Mm. Wonderful. Can you describe for us kind of the emotional journey you went through as you processed your story and your experience? Because you mentioned first just that feeling of rejection, that vulnerability that's there. What else came up for you during your processing?
Yeah, I think there's so much confusion about, you have this curiosity about your first family. You
Hmm.
feel connected and belonging with your adoptive family, and there's almost this disloyalty emotion that percolates inside your psyche, like, well, do I belong there or do I belong there? And the closed adoption piece of it makes you go in one direction. I knew I belonged with them because I had no other option. I had no other connection. But still, I had this incredible belonging with my twin sister, which really, is a good twist to the story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a unique experience to have a twin through all of that. That's really been kind of through it all. Mhm.
Yeah, we could
Wow.
probably do another podcast episode on that alone.
I bet. Because I mean, like having a twin on its own is interesting.
It's
Wow.
been an interesting phenomena. Because of writing 2 books now, I've
Yeah.
had 5 sets of identical twins that were adopted together
Hmm.
contact me, and we have this whole little relationship going, and
Wow.
we all have similar experiences. It's a crazy thing.
Oh my
So
gosh.
our own little support group.
That's right. Wow. Now, when did you, I guess, in your processing throughout your life, did you ever do any like formal like therapy or groups or anything like that? Or was it mostly just kind of this internal
No,
thing?
back in the day, so like 65 years ago, they didn't really talk about it.
Right. Hmm.
Know anybody that was adopted beside my sister and I and my brother. So there wasn't anybody really to talk to about it. Um, my parents talked to us about it occasionally, but one of the things that adoptees all share is this fantasy life
Hmm.
about who their first family was and why they were placed for adoption. So that was something that my twin sister and I talked about in the room we shared together. Every once in a while, we would say, "Well, what do you think? Do you think they were teenagers or
Hmm.
adults, whatever?" And so there is this rich fantasy life, this curiosity about it. When we were 30 years old, we wrote a letter to Catholic Charities and asked for information,
Hmm.
and promptly got a letter that said nothing can be shared at this time,
Oh.
which was the state law at that time in Illinois. No information could be shared. And then 2011, which right about the time I was trying to figure out my family health history, the laws changed. and they were able to give me non-identifying information. So those fantasies that we had as teenagers got blown out of the water because none of it was true.
Yeah.
And as far as processing that, there's a lot of information I'm still processing. Laura. One fact is that I learned I was part Native American, and that wasn't a culture that I was exposed to growing up. I didn't know anyone that was Native American, and I'm still trying to figure out how to add that to my identity piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a big piece of kind of adoption talk that I hear now is that cultural component and how affirming it can be to try to continue that in someone's adoptive family to make sure, because that's such a huge part of someone's identity, especially if they remember that part of themselves or discover that part of themselves.
And it's certainly the international adoptees that are placed in white families, they don't look like their adoptive parents, so they stand out. And a lot of them are not raised in the culture from which their heritage is. So that's another really difficult situation.
Absolutely. What first prompted sending a letter to Catholic Charities when you were 30?
I had 3 kids at that time, and I was starting to be curious about, things that they were showing. They're all really healthy, but 3 of my 4 kids went to college to play college sports. And that athleticism was not in my husband's side of the family. So there was some curiosity about that, but then also just a little forward looking about health issues, which came into play 20 years later.
Right. Was your experience becoming a mother, like how did that shape anything for you in processing?
Yes, it did. I think being pregnant and having the first daughter, I thought about my own birth mother going through that experience. And, part of my story is that I do end up meeting my birth mother, and I find out that she didn't even know she was having twins until we were born. So there was a lot of mystery around being a young mother and not being able to ask questions. When you're pregnant, you ask your mom questions about, how was this for you? And certainly I couldn't ask my adoptive mom about it, although my twin sister was pregnant usually around the same time I was. So we at least had that to share with each other. But yeah, so the young mother thing raised a lot of white flags.
Sure. What kind of led up, I mean, you've touched on this a little bit, so you noticed some things in your kids, like the athleticism, and then years later, there were some health issues that you experienced. That's what kind of initiated the search for family?
Right. That's exactly right. And that's when I started getting involved with social workers because I wasn't sure how to go about this whole business of searching for birth parents. I didn't know anyone that had done that. And it was still pretty early in like the genealogy standpoint. There was no database that was helpful to me. I was matching with 3rd and 4th, 5th cousins, which at that point I didn't even have any names. So it was difficult. And the state of Illinois had a program, a confidential intermediary program that was under the auspices of a judge. And she was a social worker. So she actually helped me craft my letter to my birth mother. She did the outreach. She coached me on rejection, what might happen. She, one of the most wonderful things she said was, you have to look at this situation that it's like going into a movie theater and the movie's half over. You're injecting yourself in the middle of your mother's life, and she has no warning that you're coming. So there's going to be issues. So that advice from the social worker was very realistic. It set the expectations for disappointment. But she also, and this is one of the things I loved about working with her, and another one is she reframed the situation for me. She said, even though you go through all this, and if she does reject you, which she did do, I will work with her and get her to change her mind. So don't lose hope.
Mm.
And I loved that advice, and it did happen. She did continue to work with my birth mom. It's kind of an involved story, but
Mm.
she got her on the phone and said, what about just exchanging letters with your birth daughters? What
Mm.
about that as an innocent first step? So her coaching for me and for my birth mom was the reason why the relationship really happened in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Kind
And
of that
during
mediator role.
during that rejection period, I had reached out to Catholic Charities, and the post-adoption department is
Mm-hmm.
also run by a social worker.
Ah.
And she said she invited me to join a post-adoption support group that was made up of birth mothers, adoptive parents, and fellow adoptees.
Mm.
So I've got one social worker helping me with my searches, and
Mm-hmm.
another social worker helping me understand the adoption triad
Yeah.
and what they're thinking and what their wants and needs are. And, one of the most astounding things that came out of that support system was the realization that loss was a part of everybody's story. So
Mm.
adoptive parents have that inability, most of them,
Mm-hmm.
to have a family because of infertility. So they've lost the ability to parent a birth child, and birth parents lose the ability to parent their own biological child, and
Yeah.
that is a big setback to them, which was something that was really imperative to understand. And then adoptees, we have lost our sense of belonging and an identity, and have to kind of reframe that. So the social workers were a big factor in helping me get my arms around a very complicated subject that I stumbled into by trying to find my medical history.
Yeah. I mean, that's quite a thing to open up, right? But I think that's where it gets into also your own right to information about yourself and your history. And it kind of gets into that difficult argument of like privacy for those
Yeah.
people.
And that really is the big issue, is for the women that placed children for adoption during the closed adoption era, they were told their right to privacy would be respected.
Mm-hmm.
So the rules have changed, are starting to change in a good many states, where the leaning now is that an adoptee has the right to information. They have a right to know.
Mm.
And that's being debated in so many states to change the adoption statutes to
Mm-hmm.
allow people in my age group to have access.
Wow. I wonder, like, what is your perspective on the privacy aspect?
I respect the fact that my birth mom was told one thing and then the rules changed. She was pretty mad about that.
Mm.
She softened on that, of course, because now we have this relationship.
Yeah.
But it caused her a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of shame surrounding her being an unwed mother, and also blaming herself for placing two babies for adoption and not parenting them. She that secret she kept all the way through her 48-year marriage with her husband. She never told him,
Wow.
which is another, how do you undo a lie? And she never told any of her family members either. So there was a
Mm.
lot of work for her to do with her family in order to bring us into her life.
Right. Wow. Were you also, I mean, trying to reach out to other family members as well, or were you kind of waiting for her to lead
Um,
that?
I was not privy to what her real name was.
Okay.
The social worker that was the intermediary was
Mm-hmm.
not allowed by the judge, did not give her permission to release my birth mom's name.
Mm-hmm.
So until she agreed for that exchange of information, I didn't know who she was. I had an alias that she had used, which was on my birth record. And so there was no real way, because
Mm-hmm.
DNA analysis being what it was back then, there
Right.
was no way to really reach out to anybody because I didn't have a name.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, of course, people can try to connect through 23 and Ancestry. And maybe they get lucky that somebody in their biological background is also trying to connect. But that's not always the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine, well, first is going throughout your life, processing this, processing the feeling of rejection and all those other things. And then there is that outreach and there's another rejection from her directly is just like devastating in that moment.
It was. And if it wouldn't have been for that post-adoption support group, I don't think that I would have come to a level of acceptance and forgiveness of the situation. It was pivotal in healing through that rejection. We call that secondary rejection in the adoption world. And it's tough. It's tough for a lot of people. Some adoptees never make it through that in the sense that their birth mom doesn't change her mind. And the situation's reversed. A lot of birth parents are trying to make connection with their child who might also be rejecting them. So it's a two-way street. It's not just adoptees that are being rejected. So I know it's crushing to those birth mothers, because I was in support group with them, and oh my gosh, I can't even imagine how it feels as a birth mom, and Mother's Day comes around.
Right.
And you can't claim to be a mother because it's your deep, dark secret. So much shame and so much secret keeping, which I'm sure you have ways, social workers have ways to help everybody with that, to just name it and acknowledge it and address it head on.
Absolutely. I really love this support group with, as you said, like the adoption triad there, because I think there's certainly a benefit to meeting with other adoptees, but to get everyone's experience and perspective is so healing, because it just allows that empathy to really stand where you can, I mean, even though it's not your specific, like, first family, you can still start to see, oh, wow, okay, there's a bigger story here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, AA has that support group system too. And when you're with your tribe and you're feeling known and you're feeling acknowledged, and it is just so validating to realize you're not alone in what you're feeling, and people offer advice on how to get through that.
What a journey. What a journey. All for medical history, right? And
the best part of the story, which I don't want to spoil the ending, is I do find a brother and a sister, and they turn out to be the best part of the story for me, because they didn't have any baggage coming into this relationship.
Right.
They were really excited to have two older sisters.
Wow.
They looked at their father with a different set of eyes, and he also rejected my sister and I, so we never did get to meet him. But my brother and sister have been a wonderful addition to the family, and I think that for most adoptees, when they find a sibling, they have an immediate connection with them, and because the siblings don't carry the baggage that the parents do emotionally, relationships are a lot easier to form.
Certainly. Did you share a father with your siblings?
Yes, we shared a father. So my birth mom never had any other kids. My sister and I are it. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Oh my gosh. So then you're gaining siblings from this, and so many, just a roller coaster of emotions that you're going through.
Right. And at the same time, my adoptive mom, my dad was fine, but my adoptive mom was not thrilled about all this.
Right.
she was threatened, which is, I think, an issue that adoptive parents have when their children decide to research their past.
Mm-hmm.
She was threatened. I think she feared that she was going to get pushed aside by the other mother.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't happen. Fortunately, I suspected that that's how she was going to react, and I had some good coping skills and to address that, which, is a good point to bring up here. I waited to a point in my life where I was able to handle some of the rejections and the setbacks. Not that I ever wanted to deal with that, but when younger adoptees start down this path, they haven't really had as many life experiences as I did.
Yeah.
And I think it can be harder on them because their identity system, their sense of self, their belonging is maybe not as well established.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it can have the rejection and the secondary rejection that we were talking about. I think it can have debilitating effects.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. You had already kind of established your own life, your own identity, your family and everything.
I belonged to my twin sister. I belonged
Mm-hmm.
to this nice, wonderful family, and I had a husband and 4 kids.
Yeah.
To kind of bolster me, but it still was rocketing.
Mm-hmm.
I think a mother's rejection is always a tough thing for anybody to deal with. We carry that within us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. At what point did you let your adoptive parents know that you were doing this search?
Well, I had to tell them immediately because they still had my adoption papers.
Oh, that's important.
So I couldn't start a thing without that.
Mm-hmm.
So they did know from the get-go. And as I said, my dad was pretty fine about it, but my mom was not. And again, that's, back to that loyalty piece.
Mm-hmm.
I did have a friend kind of take me to task over doing the whole search, intimating that I was being disloyal, that my parents had given me this beautiful life and I was turning my back on them by doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes to, the perspective of being in that adoption support group.
Yeah.
And that she wasn't touched by adoption in any way, but she had formed an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always a dangerous thing. If you haven't worn the shoes to sit back in judgment of somebody, and I had, really had called her a friend. We're still friends, but you know what? I put some walls up with her because I don't think she really listened or understood. And I think that that's a big takeaway for people in any charged emotional setting like this is sit back, listen to the person that's touched by adoption or touched by whatever it is, and see what their perspective is before you form an opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what's so important too for social workers to remember is that, these are real people that are going through incredibly difficult journeys and emotions and processing. It's so important to learn from people that have lived experience rather than just assuming and being like, oh, well, this is what it's going to be like, or I'm sure this is what they're feeling. Listen to the people that you're working with. It's a lot.
Yeah. And on the contrary, so she took, I think, basically the same side as my adoptive mom, that it was a loyalty issue. And then you have people that take the other side that say, well, your birth mom's going to welcome you with open arms. Ooh. She's going to want her daughter back. Well, that doesn't happen either.
We don't know that.
No, we don't know that either. And I had a little bit of that naivete, and I thought, why wouldn't she want us back in her life? Well, it was more complicated than that. She had a failed relationship. She'd kept the secret. So each side of the adoption triad has their own set of baggage that they bring.
Absolutely. What have been some of the most helpful things that have supported your healing and as you've gone through this journey?
Well, the social workers and the support group for sure. I did a
Woohoo!
lot. Yay! I did a lot of journaling through the whole search process.
Yeah,
And then those journals were very instrumental to me in writing my first book, the memoir about the adoption search, which
amazing.
has a crazy ending. And there's this crazy connection between my brother and my adoptive family. So it's a fun story because it ends happy.
Mm.
So journaling and writing and the support group system were the biggest help, I think.
Mm. Absolutely. What was it like to write your books? Like, were you like reprocessing things? Did you have like new perspectives on it during that process?
The journaling, I think, is the first time that I was trying to figure out what I really thought about everything. And you write, your innermost thoughts, thinking
Yeah.
nobody's going to read them. And then going back to actually write a book that everybody's going to read,
Mm.
and framing the scenes so that you feel like you're in them as opposed to pages and pages of narration. That was a whole new learning process.
Mm-hmm.
And I relived it all over again every single time. I rewrote and rewrote and rewrote. So I'm pretty
Wow.
clear on what I think about everything by this point.
Yes. You've had the time and the writing for it.
Yeah, yeah. And
Wow.
I've had other big things to tackle, and my process in working through those things too is the same, is
Mm-hmm.
journaling, talking to a counselor, and writing about it.
Yeah.
Because writing it puts your brain in a different place. It's a
Mm-hmm.
little disorienting, but I think you really learn what you think about an issue and what you need to work on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love journaling. It's something that I will always recommend. I think I've kept a journal. I have all my journals since I was like 8. And it's so interesting to like look back on them and be like, oh my gosh,
I
this is
know.
what was going through my mind. This is what I was
Yeah, I don't
feeling.
know about
Wow.
you, but I had one of those crazy pens that was like 5 colors and you had
Yes.
to click on them. And so, I would change colors in the middle. I got such a hoot of looking at myself as a teenager, like, "Huh, what was I thinking? And this is in green and this is in red." So they are fun to go back and reread.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh. So exciting. And a lot of happy moments that happened, a lot of like new family connections you were able to develop while still a lot of grief, a lot of loss that was still there.
Yeah.
Mm.
And a lot of personal growth as a result of
Yeah.
having gone through all that. And also for my family, I think that's the other piece of this that,
Mm.
you know, um, I did bring other family members with me to my support group, and I felt supported by having them there with me, but they also learned something too.
Yeah.
I loved the fact that we could bring somebody to our group
Mhm.
and everything stayed within the group, and um, I think it was good for them also. And having written my first book, Twice a Daughter, my kids got a better idea of what I was going through at that time period,
Mhm.
and looking at it as, oh, mom had a lot going on during that time period.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
I
were.
would say a lot.
Yeah, they were pretty angry at my birth mom for her rejection, but they
Mm.
did end up all meeting her, and I think that's kind of a fun thing to meet your biological grandmother a few times.
Absolutely. Yeah. How did things develop between you and your birth mom then? So there was that kind of second rejection that happened.
Yeah, we moved pretty quickly once the social worker negotiated with her about contact.
Mm.
We exchanged cards and letters, then that moved to phone calls, and then we set an in-person meeting. So while it moved slowly, I mean, it was about 6 weeks time.
Hmm.
I think that was the right pace for all of us.
Yeah.
I do wonder about adoptees that connect through 23andMe right off the bat and then jump into something.
Hmm.
Um, I think you need to prepare yourself for some of the letdowns that undoubtedly happened. For example, the first time I was out to dinner with my birth mom, with my twin sister, she wouldn't introduce us as her daughters. She just said, these are friends visiting from Chicago. And that was so hurtful.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. Almost as hurtful as the secondary rejection.
Yeah.
That I had a social worker I could call and say, what do I do with this? And the advice was, call her out on it.
There we go.
Call her out on it. Be gentle. Tell her how much it hurts your feelings and that you would appreciate her introducing you in a different way. So back to my initial point, which was people that connect immediately through some genealogical site, they don't have the benefit of an expert helping them through the painful parts of building a relationship. And oftentimes those relationships fail because they don't have the skills that they've had assistance in building.
Yeah. Because it also is, like you said, a lot faster, so immediate. So you're also not giving yourself the time to really process and sit with and understand what is going on. How am I feeling about all of this? And then developing any skills to move forward.
Right. And I mean, there's so much adoption literature, the really good books to read to kind of prepare yourself. Well, what if my birth father doesn't acknowledge me as his daughter? In my case, because my birth father chose to deny, I had to have my brother do a DNA test to prove that we were even related.
Yeah.
And because my birth father's name is not on my birth certificate, I can't claim to be a Native American, be part of that tribe, because I can't claim that. So there's a lot of ramifications of the DNA analysis, some good and some bad.
Right. As with many things. Oh, wow. Now, as we kind of wrap up, what's a piece of advice you would give to social workers that are kind of in this line of adoption work?
Well, do what you do best, which is, listening and affirming and validating and then reframing the story, that it's not always about you. What's happening is not about you personally. It's about a bigger picture. Take a step back, put yourself in, your birth parents or your birth child's position and try to envision what they might be going through. And that reframing, I think, is very helpful in accepting and forgiving and healing, moving on.
Absolutely. There's so many thoughts and feelings during that process that just holding space for it, reframing, doing all those things is really valuable. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julie, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Such an incredible story, of resilience.
I love talking about how much the social workers helped me, and I think it's a good tool for adoptees to utilize in gaining access to their story and having relationships with birth family.
Oh, amazing. Now, for those listening, I know you have your website, you have a couple of books. What are the titles of the books?
Twice a Daughter, A Search for Identity, Family, and Belonging is the memoir about my search. And then I have a book that came out last fall called Belonging Matters, and Conversations on Adoption, Family, and Kinship. And it's essays that really serve as a companion piece to Twice a Daughter. And then next year I have a second memoir coming out.
Exciting.
The prequel to Twice a Daughter. It's a story of my twin sister and I and what all we went through as kids and family struggles and family building. So, yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So exciting. Well, thank you everyone so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to like and follow the podcast on wherever you're listening. And thank you again, Julie, for coming on. We will see you next time.
Perfect. Thank you.